Hi guys, so I'm Tiago. I've worked at SteelEye, which is now joining with FundApps into a single company for around 5 years. I've done a bit of everything there, but I've mostly focused on AI and data science. So over the years I've drifted more and more, and now I kind of lead that space there. So today I'll talk about a bit AI on that domain. So at SteelEye, at financial compliance, what we use it for, how we think about using AI and when do we avoid using it, and then just cover a bunch of things that, while not as interesting, I'd say, because what gets me into AI is the model training, the benchmarking, the prompt engineering, is all the required things that clients also need to take this to production and to actually use this and to actually leverage this. So what do we do? So SteelEye, we sell software, and we sell software to financial firms. Financial firms are heavily regulated. They have a huge set of laws they need to comply with. Part of them is around market abuse. So basically, don't do naughty things in the market, and that will include trade surveillance, so actually monitoring the trades that go in and out of the systems, but also the communications around those trades. So people actually sharing insider information or actually planning to do illegal things. And that's what I'll be focusing the most, because that's where we use AI the most at SteelEye, because communications are a more complex domain. The free text makes it a lot harder than trades where everything is tabular. Rule engines plus some simple statistical models usually suffice. So that's a broad domain of it. What we actually do, so we sell the software, we then ingest communications from our clients, from the actual monitored populations of the traders, and those will include emails, WhatsApp chats, Zoom calls, a bunch of communication channels. We ingest them, we treat them, and then we try and raise alerts for compliance teams at those institutions to actually look at and try and find illegal behavior. The constraints there are broadly the same as any other classificative problem. We're trying to find what's relevant, find the true positives, and avoid raising the noise, avoid raising false positives. The issue is that the cost is not the same. If we miss an actual breach, the financial institution will get fined, and people might actually go to jail. So the cost to actually raising or missing true positive is high. Whereas raising false positives, yes, the clients will not be happy because it's a lot more work, but it is an expected part of the work, and the regulators themselves will expect them to be working through at least some false positives. If you're not working through some false positives, you're probably being overly cautious. So what this translates to, and the first way we think about AI at SteelEye, is we always tune for recall. We always tune to finding most of the relevant things, even if that means catching a bunch of irrelevant things, a bunch of noise. This leads us to, obviously, casting a wide net, and then having to actually work it down to something that is manageable. We do that via the application of various models. The pipeline generally looks like all ingested comms, and then we apply some rules, we narrow it down, and then we apply some more expensive models, and so on and so forth, until we get something that is actually manageable by the users. And the second one is, how do we actually view AI? How do we actually decide to apply AI? It's just common sense, and these are not like hard rules, but something we think of while we go through the engineering process of how to solve a particular issue. And the first one is, use it when it actually makes sense. If it doesn't make sense, or if we can solve that issue with some complex aggregations, some fancy UI work, we'd rather do that than introduce a new model, new black box to manage. And then that leads us to, if we do decide to build a model, if we do decide to actually solve this with AI, we generally tend towards buying something off the shelf, something we can leverage right away, because we're not an AI company. We're not OpenAI selling state-of-the-art models. We're selling compliance, and if something can help us sell stuff faster, we'd much rather do it. And these would be general purpose models, for example. And lastly, we will build stuff if it actually matters. So if it fits the domain and no one else is doing it, then yes, we'll do it. And what does this, where does the line actually stand? So buying, we generally buy transcription, we generally buy translation, LLMs, base models. These are all things that are very complex to do, and we'd be competing with very big players, and we'd be always being left behind. The same goes for fine-tuning models, which is a question we get very often. We don't, and the reason for it, even though we've looked into it a bunch, is we'd be marrying ourselves to a particular model, particular version, and these models move very fast. So we'd be investing a bunch of resources, a bunch of time, and in 6 months, a new version comes out and we're left behind. What we do end up building, like I was saying, is, for instance, purpose-built classifiers. Yes, there is email classifiers out there, but not in the financial domain where they can predict trade confirmations or research notes, etc. And this leads us to what do we actually have at SteelEye. We generally like to organize this into 4 categories. The first one, top left, is actually finding the risks. This is the core of the platform. For this, you use AI, which now no one actually calls this AI. It was at the time. It's NLP. It's the standard rule-based decompose language into a set of rules and try and find patterns in that. That's still the core of the platform because it's very, very explainable. It's very easy to understand, and it's very easy to trace back something and say, this is exactly why I found it, or this is exactly why I missed it. And the clients liked it because they can then go to the regulator and say, this is exactly what we do. There's no black boxes. Obviously, that misses a whole bunch of context in language. So we have something that we call neural, just LLMs actually doing the same job, trying to find these alerts. Then bottom left, understanding more. This is where transcription comes in, translation comes in. It's about actually getting people to understand what they're seeing, actually getting some channels like voice through the system. Otherwise, it would be much, much more expensive to process raw voice. On the left then, it's more of the reduce noise and improve efficiency. Like I said, we cast a wide net. We then try and narrow it down. That's email classification, email zone, and broadly try and find authored content. And then at the bottom, making it faster. We call it Copilot, again, LLM, just parsing through all of these alerts and getting it through. Again, this broadly looks like an inverted pyramid. We're catching a bunch, and then we're narrowing it down with more and more expensive models, leaving the most expensive ones to the last part because of efficiency. And I'll pause here, and this is broadly what we do at SteelEye and how we think of AI at SteelEye. Any questions you guys want to ask? It's fine. I'll have more time at the end. So, sorry.
I'm just curious about what happens when you surface a potential fraud alert to a person. How do they react? Do they think, oh, it's probably AI, they're probably right, I'm probably wrong, so think of it, I'll consider this as a real fraud?
Yeah, so the standard process is our clients, the financial institutions, need to maintain an internal team. They keep the responsibility of managing these alerts. We're merely raising them. They're the ones to actually validate them, and if they are actual breaches, reporting them to agencies. The general attitude is it's a false positive because that's the vast majority of what they'll see day to day, but every so often they'll see something that's an actual breach. So there is some bias towards, yes, it's the AI being overreactive because we do tune it that way, but at the end of the day, it's on them, the actual users, to decide what it is. Yeah.
So the whole way through the chain, you're keeping some form of, I guess, an audit that you can come back to each of those events. So whilst it, not necessarily an LLM, but wherever it ends up, you've got attribution that you can come back to.
That's exactly one of the topics I'll cover next. But yes, that's something we strive towards. I wouldn't say we have full coverage of it, but it's something we strive towards, having where it actually dropped, why it actually dropped. Because again, if they get audited, that's something they will need to evidence to the regulator. Yeah.
So you've been working on this for the last at least 5 years
Mhm.
in SteelEye, and we have been hearing more about AI in our jobs for the last maybe, especially last year, but
Mhm.
2 years. How has it changed for you
Mm.
with the models that you can use, with the work that you can do in those, 5 years and then now the last 2?
Yeah, so I think it's useful to take this previous slide in an historical perspective. So we started off with Lexica as a base thing, and NLP is old by today's standards. That has always been our base thing, and that's where we started without any other AI aspects to it. What we then brought in was transcription, translation, trying to expand. These were already pretty advanced models, and then we started bringing on actual in-house built models, email classifiers, email zoners. For me, as we went through this, new capabilities were emerging. So 5 years ago, OpenAI was already a thing,
Yeah.
but GPT was not widely known nor widely used. The thing at the time were LSTMs, which was much, much more limited, and BERT models, which these are. So much smaller models, much harder to get a good sense of context as they process stuff. Once we started getting these new models, the actual job just opened up. We couldn't get the context understanding that we now can. So the things we can do now are much, much wider, especially in this context dealing with natural language, especially in this context dealing with adversarial inputs like people trying to be sneaky around illegal things. So it has been expanding, and this new wave of LLMs is really just groundbreaking for processing these things.
So the value for clients is now much
Yep.
bigger.
Yeah, it used to be that all there was rule-based detection, and
Yeah.
now, yeah.
Yeah. My question is that how much do you have to fight with GDPR and other things? Because you would think that immediately that the market here is that, okay, let's analyze some emails from 90s and so on. But big companies from like very old emails and so on, I think that there is still regulation that if people have left the company, you cannot actually anymore store their data and so on. So do you kind of find this?
Yeah. So generally we're, I think, seen as a processor. So the onus is on the clients. They're the ones collecting the data. We're then just processing as a third party. We do comply with the GDPR, and it's part of the product. For instance, retention dates, etc. All of those things already are part of the product, even before we bring in any AI. Even if we're looking at the product just as a record-keeping thing where people would ingest all their emails, we're already complying there because we need to delete them, etc., etc. But the major onus is on the actual clients to provide us data that they can actually provide us, that we can actually have. And generally, we're generally under the exception of legally required processing.
So do you check your customers' kind of data retention policies or kind of?
They'll communicate it to us. It's the other way around. They require us to comply with their retention policies.
Just
Maybe?
to add on that, so in terms of GDPR, there is a clause in the regulation that says that it is okay to keep PII information based on business need. So it is more nuanced than just removing PII.
Yeah.
There's always a reason for it. So for example, Amazon, if you raise a GDPR request for Amazon saying that deletion, which is our right, they will only delete except for things that's required from a regulatory point of view, so that they will hold the information.
Yeah.
So for us, is we are in a realm of compliance. In compliance, to do compliance, you need PII. So therefore, we are in a way exempted in that sense. There are few nuances that was mentioned, so our platform handle those nuances, but in general, it is part of doing the job of the business.
Yeah, we are under the exception basically of it's required by law. And thank you, Ivy, my colleague at product, for the more extensive explanation. Thank you very much. Nice. Any more questions? Yeah.
Do you find that people change their communication when they find out that companies employ these AI tools?
Well, we don't know because we're not there beforehand, but I'd expect no, because I'm not sure. That's what I'd say, because I'm not sure how widely disseminated the information is that they're now acquiring a better surveillance system. I genuinely don't know.
But assume this is a requirement for financial institutions. It's not that you want to do it or you don't want. You need to do it to be compliant and be able to trade and be in this business. So it's not.
A long time ago, my wife used to work for what was the old FSA, and her job was to audit hedge funds and private equity back in those 12 plus years ago. But even then, mobile calls were monitored, everything was monitored. You know, they were looking for someone having two mobiles and making two calls. You know, just there was all these different things. It was already back then, so anyone who's trading would know that if you're entering that world, they're looking for insider trading.
Yeah, exactly. And we'll also look for things, just getting a bit more on the product. For instance, side channels, as in call me on my something, because that's usually will happen.
There's a lot of technology that pairs mobile phones together. Like I have two phones in my pocket and those two travel together.
Yeah.
People just don't realise that stuff's out there and it's deployed.
But yeah, generally people do try to be covert, and that's one of the things I'll also cover next, is actually measuring these. So when people try to be covert and actually having data like that is one of the challenges. Good. So next up, so I just wanted to cover also everything around AI. So training the model, like I was saying, is fun, is interesting, but there's a whole lot of engineering that goes around the models into making this a successful product and making it something that is actually sellable to clients. Just a series of cases that I like to expose. The first one is around data and actually making sure that your models are performing well. So it used to be that you'd need to train your own models, and so you'd get out of that a test set where you can measure the performance. Now with LLMs, the model comes pre-trained. It comes out of the box already knowing what you need it, and you just prompt it into doing the tasks you need. Our measuring that it's actually doing what you need, and measuring across model upgrades, as in version 5 was released, is it performing the same way as version 4? Is it interpreting my prompt in the same way? Or has it understanding shifted and something that I was saying is now making it worse? Measuring these things is hard. In this domain, it's specifically hard because real breaches are very rare. People are not just out there committing fraud every day, and we're not catching all of those cases anyway. So actual data of this is very rare, and even for the ones we do have from clients, we find that it clusters around some of the behaviors we cover, not all of them. So we'll cover things like insider trading, but also harassment, wash trading, some other categories of market abuse, and we find that it clusters around just a few. However, we want to cover all of them, and we want to benchmark the performance for all of them. Our solution for this was synthetic data, so asking LLM, please generate me some fake emails. However, what we find from this very naive approach, and even iterating a bit on it, is that we get just plain obvious, on the nose, I want to do insider trading, I have a big secret to tell you, or just plain nastiness if you go into harassment, just plain there, stuff that even our rule-based system will catch outright because it's just that obvious. And if we're trying to measure performance of an LLM, we're expecting it to catch much more subtle things. So what we ended up going down was actually prompting explicitly for nuance, prompting explicitly for subtleness, which wasn't enough, but got us started into a self-reflection loop. So asking the model iteratively, check your work, are you actually doing what I'm asking you to do? And then key, attacking that with an extra LLM. Specifically, a different family of LLMs, which will have different biases, different training sets, different architectures. Actually attacking it and say, this is a fake email, it's supposed to be this, and it's supposed to be nuanced. It's supposed to be subtle. Is it actually? And then closing that loop and feeding it back to the first one and say, hey, it was caught, it's not good. Go back and work it. At the end of this, we got our subject matter experts actually reviewing these alerts. And what we found is that they were now actually balanced, they're actually diverse, and they're actually real looking. In their words, these looked like actual communication, not just something that's a part of a test set. We do also find that there is still some obvious stuff in there. Sometimes it does fail, and sometimes it's just too obvious. Sometimes it's too unobvious. It's just no behavior is there, and it's also an issue. We're also exploring this for bias detection. So detecting bias in these models is hard, and especially because you don't have data to actually measure it. Our thinking is maybe we can prompt it towards generating data for certain geographies, certain ethnicities, and then benchmark it, as in, are we raising more alerts for a specific religion, for example? How that actually plays out with data and how that surfaces to an actual email is not straightforward, and we're still working on that. But the key finding here was that adversarial loop of actually going back and forth with multiple LLMs, multiple families, to get the diversity and the subtleness that we required. Next up was scaling, so making it reliable and make it not fail. We found quickly, as we started to deploy these LLM agents, these LLM systems, that the most frequent failure case was resource quotas. Rate limits from Azure OpenAI, which is the managed service we use, were the killer for us, and we just kept hitting them and kept failing. Investigating this, they claim a request per minute limit. That's not actually true. They're actually doing some near instantaneous estimate of what you're sending now versus how that maps out to a full minute, and then capping you off right then and there. So even if we were well within the limits, we were still getting rate limited. Why does this matter for us is that clients send us a whole bunch of data at the end of the day or at the start of the day, and they expect the smallest lead time between us receiving the data and alerts being ready. So it leads to huge spikes in processing, and that leads to these rate limits. Also, we're paying for the compute making the requests. So we also have an interest in being as fast as we can, because for Azure OpenAI, you pay per usage, not per the time we're using the LLM. Looking into this, so the stated solution from Azure themselves is to do back-off retries, exponential, add jitter. We've done that. It was working, but we were wondering, can we make it better? Can we actually go and do a queue? Can we do back pressure? We did. We prototyped it, and it turns out we benchmark it, behaves roughly the same. The actual difference here was adding jitter at the start of each request, not at the end or at the retries. And this means because when we go into a multiprocessing window, you just hit the endpoint with a bunch of requests at the same time. Even hitting with like 1,000 requests will trigger the instantaneous limit for like 20, 30, 50,000 requests per minute. So the key here was adding a jitter at the start, very small, milliseconds, and that would phase out the requests enough that we no longer hit the limits. The other bottleneck we found, so we're using Python's implementation of OpenAI, the package they publish. They're actually using HTTPX, which has a bottleneck for concurrency as well. We ended up going through building a custom client with IAO HTTP. Works great. Issue, we're now moving away from the standard library. We're now not getting the features, or we'll need to maintain them and develop them as they come out. So what did we instead choose to? Just horizontally scale it. Same limits with the stock client, but we just had more replicas. The cost is roughly the same, because we're paying for memory footprint, and we're only keeping on memory the requests we want to make. So vertically scaling, it's almost the same cost. It also limits the blast radius if any one of those replicas fails. So it ended up being a much simpler solution in both cases that made it through to production rather than a more complex, more advanced one. Next one is self-hosting LLMs. We got this request sometimes from clients. It looks easy on the face of it. We ended up using VLLM, prototyping with it very fast. It works very well, even all the way to production. what we found is the kicker is on the actual maintenance of the infrastructure. So once you start owning all of this, the nodes, the GPUs, actually the drivers and the model weights all the way down, it becomes a whole new thing that you need to monitor, and something that we really didn't consider when we were just prototyping and playing around with a few GPUs. The other one is that often these special clients that have some data sovereignty requirements are also in very special geographies that have limitation on GPUs. So that there will be scarcity of GPUs. And we're now managing all of that, optimum scale-up times, etc., just to self-host LLM. So it becomes a whole thing, and all the monitoring needs to be in place. Otherwise, you might end up with things like, I don't know, the cluster requests a GPU, the node starts joining, fails halfway, it's half joined, no LLM can spin up, and it just stays there in that zombie state for 2 days, spending money, failing out every workflow. Not that it happened. Maybe you target a specific availability zone because the GPUs are there. And sometimes the GPU comes up in another availability zone, and your weights are in zone A, the model is now in zone B, everything fails, everything's there for a day spending money, and these GPUs are very expensive. Again, not something that happened to us at all, not that the client complained. And explaining this to clients, it's not easy. Like, why? Why is it failing? Well, we forgot to do something. But yes, there's a whole thing. The key here is there's a whole thing about hosting LLMs rather than just spinning up VLLM on a node, on an EC2. There's a whole monitoring, a whole thing of host of things that we need to take care of now because of it. Next up, like we were talking before, auditability all the way through. It's also a common request from clients. Are you actually auditing? And eventually, we are, most of it. So all the inputs to models, all the outputs to models, that's fairly straightforward. Actually tracing that through the system very quickly and managing to find this specific request here, targeting this email and this alert maps to these sets of inputs and outputs. That's the tricky part. Again, not groundbreaking. We do this for other parts of the software. But just building out these things is part of an AI deployment. And the other is similar, but different, drift detection. So drift is model degradation over time. So how do we actually monitor that the model isn't getting worse over time, or that the data that it used to see is now different? We do this by, for instance, for the models we train ourselves, we can actually measure input drift. So actually think of it, take text, pass it through halfway through the model, and see how different the model finds that text. We call that, it's called Kullback label divergence, tensor similarity, something like that. For hosted models, you get nothing of that. There's very little you can do apart from storing log probabilities. And it makes it very hard to track drift. What we end up doing for those is tracking the actual outcome of the model. So how are the alerts being resolved? And tracking that over time allows you to see some trends. For example, you might find that 2 days after the deployment, all the scores from 5 up are gone. And maybe something made it into main that it shouldn't, and made it into prod, maybe. But this allows you to find that very quickly, which you'd otherwise not find, because the model is still working fine, everything is working fine, its actual output changed. And the same can happen over time for the input, but that's much harder to do and track for LLMs. So I was also mentioning, so explainability, I was talking about how you can track. The other big question we get from these clients is, that's fine, you have a big AI model, can we actually understand it? And the answer is no. These models are black boxes, but they are very good, so we want to use them. There are some things we have managed to bring on. For example, saliency maps, for example, gradient attributions. InSec is a really nice package in Python for these things. But this requires that you actually have the model weights. If you don't have the model weights, you can't do any of this. You can store log probabilities, so that's in the output, what's the probability for each token, but that gives you very little in a managed system. So we can always point clients towards, there is a deterministic alternative, it's Lexica, it's rule-based, but you're leaving a lot of performance on the table. So it is always a trade-off, but having some of these tools at hand for the deployment is really useful. Also, for instance, in gradient attributions, you might find that maybe your model is paying attention to a part of your prompt that you are not expecting it to, that is not relevant at all to the use case. Maybe the classification that the model is giving is not actually looking at the list of options that you're giving it, and it's looking somewhere else in your prompt. That all comes from this explainability tool, so they can be useful to explain to clients why something happens, but also during the development process to understand how models actually look at prompts. And obviously, so what's next? It's on everyone's mind. It's the new buzzword, agents. We've been looking for this for the past year, trying to find use cases. Again, that same mentality of it needs to fit. It needs to be the correct solution, not just a solution that everyone's talking about. So we've been discussing this. I think we've found now a couple of use cases that we're comfortable with actually going with. But the key also is that all these topics I was talking about, reliability, auditability, explainability, all become harder with agents. As they're actually going off on their own, making God knows how many prompts into the LLM, it becomes much, much harder to track them, to explain what is actually happening. All of these things become much, much more difficult, and that's why it needs to be taken with care, and we're thinking of it right now, and that's what we're planning to do next. And that's about it. Thank you very much for listening to me. I hope you find that interesting, that you had some takeaways. So, open to questions? Yeah?
So I noticed a couple of slides back, it had a thing, real breaches are rare.
Yeah.
How rare? like how often do you actually see one of these things in the wild and be able to go back to your data and say, yes, that was real and we caught it?
So, some numbers.
Okay.
The expected rate, or the rate that we see across clients for alerting on our system is like 1%, roughly. When we actually want to look at the data and see the resolutions, out of 100 million communications, 200 million, around that, we had 1,000 marked positive. Of those, not all of them were actually positive.
And how long does it take to see 100 million communications? Is this a month? Is this a year? Is this a Tuesday morning?
No, not a Tuesday morning for our volumes. It depends on the clients that we have, obviously. As time went on, we moved segments. Basically, we're targeting smaller clients with much lower volumes. As we now move to bigger tier 1 institutions, like very big banks, with tens of thousands of employees, the volumes is higher. For this particular case, I think I was looking at 4 years. Okay. But again, different segments. Yeah. This was like a year all ago, so now I'd expect it to have grown a lot more. Yeah.
Cool, thank you.
Yeah.
What kind of signals are you monitoring? Like, do you have emails or?
Yeah, so on the communication side, it's emails, broadly in category. It's emails, chat messages, and voice channels. Very, very broadly. On actual emails, there will be Outlook, Bloomberg, series of clients. On chat messages, it will be Slack, WhatsApp, actual SMS, a bunch of providers there as well. And then on voice, it will be actual phone calls, but also Zoom calls, Teams chats, team calls, etc., etc. So if you can think of a platform to talk with, we can probably support it. We support, I think, over.
Telegram?
I don't know the exacts because that's more on the integration side.
Encrypted, no one can
I think I've seen Telegram, a Telegram integration, but I'm not too sure on that part. Yeah.
Telegram isn't encrypted by default. You have to turn it on.
That's good to know.
So if you forget to turn it on and you do a crime.
It's encrypted, but not end-to-end.
I was going to say, if it's a company device and they've got an MDM device, MDM whatever on there, it doesn't matter how encrypted you are, what you type in, it's still going to be.
Exactly. Generally speaking, these are company devices. Yeah. People know that they're being monitored.
They still do it.
Have you ever catched an agent?
Sorry?
Have you catched an agent? non-human?
An agent?
Yeah.
Not yet. It's something we're looking into to actually process the prompting, etc. We've not that we know of. We also don't target the automated traders as a market segment too much. So, yeah.
Any other questions, folks?
Yeah.
It was like a thing that surprised you throughout this whole journey, like that you just didn't expect something like that to happen.
Thing that surprised me. That's
We
a.
work together quite
So many things. Yeah, actually, a thing that I didn't cover here, a thing that surprised me. So while going down the rabbit hole of there's very few GPUs in this region, there's AWS in Francia, their custom silicon for LLMs and for machine learning. Their documentation states they support LLMs. The documentation states that they support the model we were trying to use, Llama. You actually go down there, it starts trying to compile drivers. You end up spending 3 weeks going through it, and you find out, surprise, surprise, it doesn't actually work at the hardware level. So that was a big surprise there, unfortunately. But yeah.
How many years do you store the AI logs?
It depends on the client. Broadly. How much they pay us. They can pay for more, basically. They can pay for more. Ideally, we'd store it, I don't know what's the default, default retention policy, probably 3 to 5 years, just going off. But it's basically the longer they want us to store it, the more they pay, because it more costs us. Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Tiago.